Awesome. For our final speaker today, I'd like to introduce Dr. Yi Wang. Dr. Yi Wang is an associate professor and state extension specialist with a research focus on sustainable vegetable production and precision agriculture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Department of Plant and Agroecosystem Sciences. Dr. Wang got her BS in biology from Nanjing Agricultural University in China and her PhD in plant physiology here at UW-Madison. The goal of her research and extension program is to conduct science-based applied research and collaborate with the vegetable growers and producers to improve and resource use efficiency and sustainability of vegetable cropping systems in Wisconsin. Dr. Wang has won several national awards, such as the American Fruit and Vegetable 40 Under 40 Award, the Agronomy Society of America Excellence in Extension Award, the Spudman Emerging Leader Award, and more. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Wang as she shares her precision agriculture technology research with us today.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to the Graduate Student Council for inviting me, and it's a great pleasure for me to speak here today. The previous two speakers from our industry partners show a lot of good research and data. If they have like 10,000 months of data, I only have 1 month of data. It's still a decent amount of data, and they provide a great vision of precision ag or the future of ag technology from an industry standpoint, and hopefully I can provide more visions as a researcher with a university. So before I talk about the research, just some general definitions to share with you guys. Precision ag has been mentioned quite a lot in recent years. Traditionally, it's only 4R strategy, doing the right thing in the right place at the right time with the right format. But nowadays, considering the fast pace of technology advancement, we add the technology into this strategy. So it's now a 4R technology. We want to take advantage of the advanced sensors, modeling techniques, automations, and so forth, and try to make sense of big data. And based upon the data, we will make decisions about irrigation, weeding, nutrient management, storage management, and such. So for my industry partners, most of you work with corn and soybean and the commodity crops. I'm working with the specialty crops, the vegetable crops that are mostly grown here in Wisconsin. Potatoes is number 1, followed by snap bean, sweet corn, and many others. For those high value, high nutrition specialty crops, they are great candidates to adopt the precision ag technologies because 1, they are very demanding for nutrients, water, pesticide, and such. And 2, the quality and yield of those crops are very sensitive and susceptible to changing climate or to different management practices. So we want to see how we can affect the performance of those crops under different precision agriculture management strategies. So the ultimate goal of adopting precision ag is to reduce the impact of agricultural production in general on the environment and reduce the environmental degradation related to poor soil health, groundwater contamination, pesticide resistance, among many others. So for the sake of time, I'm an agronomist, so I'm gonna be focused on the fertilization and irrigation management of potatoes and vegetable crops. Before I talk about the specific project, okay, oh, sorry. There are 2, sorry, this is, I think it freezes. There are two examples. The first example is this past summer, we rented a completely autonomous drone with RGB and thermal cameras. And we fly over our research plots at the UW Hancock Agricultural Research Station. This is the image collected, RGB image collected right after an irrigation event. With our naked eye, we can partially see that this part of the field is wetter than the rest of the field. But if we're looking at the thermal image, look at how different the thermal temperatures, the surface temperatures of the crops that have received irrigation water compared to the rest of the field. So for the growers, the benefit of this thermal image is going to be they can evaluate the level of water stress or any other stress in the field condition that in their naked eyes they cannot really see. A second example is we used a ground-based robot this summer to collect some RGB image from my co-PI, Dr. Erwin Goldman's onion field. And then we take hundreds of images back to the lab. We use a machine learning algorithm to automatically detect the bulbs in each image. And then our goal is to measure the size of the exposed bulbs. In each image, we can see that in general, the machine learning model works pretty well, except they can miss some bulbs, right? So precision ag or machine learning or computer-assisted technology cannot be 100% accurate. They will make mistakes. But our goal is to train a model as precise and accurate as possible. So the first research project I want to mention here is to take advantage of the hyperspectral remote sensing and data-driven modeling for predicting the potato growth in the research plots. In general, compared to the commodity crops, the vegetable, like potatoes, are very demanding for nitrogen. But they have very shallow rooting zones, meaning that they are very inefficient to capture the nitrogen fertilizer in the soil. On top of that, most of the potato production, especially here in Wisconsin, is located in the Central Sands region with very coarse texture soil, very low water holding capacity, and to make it worse, in the summertime, we have more frequent rainfall events. So that can frequently saturate the soil, and then if there is available nitrogen in the soil, they can leach into the groundwater and then cause groundwater contamination. So right now in Wisconsin, for the agricultural industry, groundwater contamination is a huge problem, and we want to be more efficient to use the fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer. We cannot under-fertilize the vegetable crops because that can reduce the yield and quality and be related to financial loss eventually. However, we can over-fertilize the crops either because that can delay the total maturity of the crops, cause too much growth on the above ground parts, and then delay the senescence, eventually cause quality reduction in the potatoes. So we have to make a good balance between the under and over use of fertilizer. And one approach is to take advantage of the newer technologies compared to the traditional technology or the traditional methodology. So this is a picture to show you guys how destructive the traditional tissue sampling can be. You can see this little white dot. That's me walking 300 feet from the edge of a potato field into a randomly selected spot and collect tissue samples. You can see how much damage I have caused on my way, right? So this is totally destructive, invasive, and then from this 120 acres of field, I can only collect one specific spot. And then I will analyze the data from this very specific spot and make it as a representation of the whole field. So if I apply a uniform rate to the whole field, I will be under the risk of under-fertilizing or over-fertilizing in other parts of the field. So this is the traditional methodology, highly time-consuming, labor-intensive, and cannot cover any spatial and temporal variability within the field. Instead, we hope to take advantage of the hyperspectral remote sensing, and by correlating the spectral data with the actual biophysical or biochemical properties of the crops, we will use machine learning or modeling techniques to understand the status of the crops and make responsive management actions like fertilization or watering. So the hyperspectral spectrum is containing the hundreds of narrow bands from 400 nanometers all the way up to 2,400 nanometers, covering both the visible and near infrared region as well as the shortwave infrared region. So here is the RGB. This is the near infrared, and these are the shortwave infrared. And we can see that in different spectral regions, the content of chlorophyll, nitrogen, protein, starch, lignin, and so forth could be related to the very specific reflectance data. This is how we can take advantage of hyperspectral imagery and then correlate the reflectance data with the biological growth of the crops and make decisions based upon that. So the general objective of this research is to use the hyperspectral remote sensing to monitor the in-season crop traits as well as to predict the final season, the end of season harvest traits, and then does it work? This is a 2-year study using 2 different potato varieties. Rusty Burbank is the most common variety on the market, as well as the Soraya. It's a fresh market variety from Europe. We had 4 different nitrogen treatments replicated for 4 times. During the growing season, we will collect weekly tissue samples from each plot. And then at the same time, we will fly a hyperspectral sensor to collect the hyperspectral data. So we have a ground truthing data as well as the spectral data to pair up. In the season, we will measure several different nitrogen-related traits in the crops, and at the end of the season, we will measure yield and quality. Just a flow chart to show the process of our image data collection. First, we will collect the images. We will do a bunch of atmospheric, geometric, geographic corrections on the raw images after stitching them. And then we will draw a polygon at the edge of each plot and extract all the pixels from that plot. We will then average all the pixels. There will be thousands of pixels because it's a really high resolution sensor. So we have to average all the pixels within the plot, removing the soil spectra, right? We only care about the vegetative spectra. And then we will pair the ground truthing data with the hyperspectral reflectance data by running this called partial least squares regression model. And then we want to evaluate the models using the R-squared value and RMSE. So here is the size of our plots. It's relatively smaller compared to the commercial scale. And then we want to make sure that all the pixels within each plot was extracted from the image. So next, here are the timeline for image collection and field collection in each growing season. We have 3 times. Depends on the weather, a lot of other factors. We try to manage the timing as close as possible between the 2 years. But in general, we have an early season, mid-season, and late season data collection. The ground truthing field measurement data wants to be as close as possible to the spectral data collection. We found that it cannot be more than 3 days apart. And then for the in-season prediction, we want to use the image on the day to predict the field measurements. There are 3 types of in-season prediction. For the final season prediction, we want to see if the early season image can be used to predict the final traits of the crops. The results look really promising. We can find that some of the traits can be well predicted by this technology. If we use 0.6 as a cutoff threshold for good model performance, we can see that a whole leaf total nitrogen level, as well as the immediate tuber yield on the day of image collection, could be well predicted for both the separate individual varieties as well as the two varieties combined, right? For the petio nitrate N and vine total nitrogen level, they can be moderately predicted, but not as good as the other two. The tuber N, only the russet Burbank can be well predicted. So it's really depending on the trait and depending on the variety for a good performance of our technology. And then we want to detect in this hyperspectral spectrum, which region works really well for the prediction of these traits. Well, it depends on specific variety and depends on the traits. For russet Burbank, the V-near, visible, and near-infrared always works the best for the model. For Soraya, for the above-ground biomass traits, V-near works the best, but SWIR works really well for the below-ground traits prediction, right? If we combine both varieties together, we can see that there is also a difference of the best spectral regions. So it's really interesting. The best performance depends on the trait and will also depend on the variety. For the final season trait prediction, we can see that the marketable yield, the specific gravity, which is an indicator of the starch content in the tubers, can be well predicted, whereas the total yield, including all different sizes of tubers, cannot be well predicted. And we looked back to the agronomic field measurements data. We can see that in 2021, there were a couple of weeks of drought stresses to the plants early in the season. In response, the plants in the control treatment developed a lot of super small tubers. We thought that environmental stress was a cause of this abnormal high percentage of small tubers, and that can affect the performance of the model. So the conclusion from the first study is that we can use this hyperspectral imaging technology together with advanced data-driven model to predict some of the traits in the potatoes, not all the traits that we measured. And then the best spectral region to use the model really depends on the trait and depends on the variety. Different varieties will have different preference, meaning that if we want to make a recommendation based on this research, it's going to be variety and crop specific. I think that is the other challenge of using AI, because different varieties have so much different traits or preferences in the real world in growing environment. So computers cannot really identify the difference. When we develop the AI technologies, we have to consider that variation. And then the in-season, early season hyperspectral imagery can be used to predict the final traits of the potatoes, especially the marketable yield and specific gravity. But for the total yield prediction, we have to consider the year-to-year weather variation. Especially with this ongoing global warming, there are more and more challenges, more extreme weather conditions that can cause the abnormal performance of the crops. Right? The yield data from 2021 is a great example of that. So we have to consider all of these kind of confounding factors or variations when developing a robust, generalized model for prediction of potato performance. But at the end of the day, the takeaway will be hyperspectral and modeling will be a promising tool for predicting the performance, the growth of the crops in the fields. And then we hope that with this new available tool, it can help the growers to make more informed decision on nitrogen management. And by the way, the PhD student who have done this research is now a data analyst with John Deere. So now we have done the proof of concept, right? The next step is to work with commercial farmers and try this technology over commercial fields and see how it performs. What are the pros and cons in a commercial setting? So the second study I'm going to present here is about some on-farm remote sensing data that we collected in the same year as the research trial. This is a 40 acres of potato field in central Wisconsin. We collaborated with the grower. They applied 2 different levels of nitrogen fertilizer to the field, but I didn't ask them where is what treatment. So for this RGB image, with my naked eyes, I can barely tell the difference. But if we use the spectral data and calculate the normalized difference vegetation index, which is an indicator of the level of stresses in the crops, obviously this part of the field has more stresses, right? I know it's nitrogen treatment, so most likely it's going to be nitrogen deficiency with this lower NDVI number. And then the rest of the field is gonna be fine. So this is called precision agriculture, right? We have to consider the specific crop needs in different specific sections of the field so that we're not gonna apply a flat rate to the whole field and then may result in a waste of resources. In this condition, I only need to apply supplemental nitrogen fertilizer to that quarter. And this will help me save some money for the use of fertilizer. This is a second example. They have, this strip of treatment might be the lower end, but I can see that more obviously from the NDVI map. And then combining all the aerial images from different farm fields that we collected in that year, we developed this NDVI change curve over the course of the whole growing season of the potatoes. And we can see early in the season, it just gradually increased until it peaks in the middle of the season and then gradually reduced. If we use all the NDVI data to predict the final yield of potatoes, the model actually performed really well. The R-squared is as high as 0.82. So now we know in a commercial setting, by collaborating with the commercial growers, this technology worked, right? But this is only 1 year of data. We need to collect more years of data to validate this model. The cross-year validation is very critical. Matt presenting the high year-to-year weather variation is a critical component for prediction yield nowadays. So whether our data can be adaptable to a different year, we need to do more study in the near future. So the takeaway messages from this research is, well, the technology worked, but guess what? What are the downsides of these? Looking at this first field, it's only a 40-acre of field. How many images we collected per flight? More than 1,000 raw images. And we have to use 4 batteries for the drone, right? And that's only 40. Considering the average potato field in Wisconsin is usually at least 60, if not 80 or up to 120 acres. So the real large-scale farming, in a large-scale farming environment, this might not be feasible, right? Might be too costly to apply this technology. So some of you guys were asking about mountains of data, how to analyze it. This is the challenge. We have to stitch the raw images first, the thousands of raw images to cover the whole field, and then extract the most useful information from that data, big data. So that will be a big challenge for the researchers to address in the near future. Next, I will be talking about switch the topic from fertilization to irrigation management. Because as I mentioned before, the potatoes are very demanding for all sources of inputs. Water is another critical practice to achieve high yield potential. So in central Wisconsin, for potato production, 99% of the growers are now using center pivots. It goes around the field for 24 to 48 hours to cover one round, and then it can cover the whole field with watering. However, the traditional or conventional center pivot only applies one uniform rate to the whole field. So there's no consideration of the within field variation. Well, that may cause some waste of water, right? If in a situation that the crops do not need that much water, then we're under a risk of wasting. So we want to increase the irrigation efficiency. And variable rate irrigation is a promising technology, but like the other AI-related technologies, it's very expensive. I'm going to mention the cost in the next slide, but so far, based on my experience, money or cost is still the biggest hurdle for wide adoption of VRI among our commercial vegetable growers. There are two different types of VRI. The cheaper version, which is speed control, versus a way more sophisticated version, and that is called nozzle control. So here are two examples to show you the two systems. The speed control is a more simple system. Many of the newer versions of center pivot can be converted into speed control VRI without any extra cost. The idea will be if your variation of soil texture, slope, or any other within field conditions are varied in pie-shaped slices, you can adopt the speed control VRI. If this part of the field does not need that much water, then you can speed up the pivot. And then if another part of the field needs more water, you can slow it down. And so that is the mechanism of controlling the speed of the center pivot and apply varied amount in different parts. This more sophisticated system, the nozzle control VRI, we can manipulate the flow in each individual nozzle. And so it's gonna be way more precise, considering much higher level of variation. But look at the cost here. It's gonna be 5 times more costly than the speed control. So nowadays, only the grower with the most variable field will adopt the nozzle control VRI. I think the speed control VRI has a way higher adoption rate among the vegetable growers. So to understand more about the crop performance difference under different VRI systems, we collaborated with a couple of farmers in Central Sands, and one farm has the speed control VRI, the other one has a nozzle control. So they recommended a field with variations in slopes and elevations, and we work with these farmers to evaluate the crop performance from the highest spot of the field, the average field condition, and then the lowest spot of the field. The highest spot of the field tends to be drier and underwatered, right? The lowest spot tends to be waterlogged, especially after rainfall. And so instead of applying uniform rate to the whole field, we want to vary the amount of water applied to the high and low spots of the field. In each irrigation event, there was a 0.3 inches of water difference between the highest and lowest spot. And we want to see how beneficial these VRI systems can be. So this is a picture I took right after a rainfall event in the first farm. You can see right after the rain, the lower spot tends to be waterlogged. And then the higher spot is still relatively dry, or obviously drier than this waterlogged spot. The second field is the same. This is even worse. Then this is the drier spot. So the traditional methodology is the growers will only evaluate their soil moisture in the average field condition. And then they will, based upon that information, to make a decision on how much water they need to apply. In that case, the higher spot will be more likely be underwatered. And the lower spot, which already has been saturated, might have a waste of water usage. So this is just an easy map of the field. For the first field, you can see this part of the field has a higher EC, meaning they have more poor drainage in the soil. And therefore, we want to manipulate the speed, the control of the speed of the center pivot when it moved here. We can speed up the center pivot so that it receives less water compared to the rest of the field. We did measure the yield numbers from the potatoes. Both farms grow Russet Burbank in that year. There is a significantly higher yield from the dry and field average compared to the wet spot. And this is under the more sophisticated nozzle control VRI. In a speed control, not significantly different, but we can still see a higher number of yield from the dry spot. We cannot really compare between these two farms because they have different farming practices, but the first field has relatively higher yield. For irrigation efficiency, the wet spot, because it received less amount of water, their irrigation efficiency has increased. And then we did the calculation. We did save about 0.15 million gallons of water by applying the variable rate irrigation from this wet spot. So we're saving water with the VRI. The water use efficiency, which considers the usage of both irrigation and rainfall water, not significantly different between the three spots. For nitrogen removal, since nitrogen and water are closely interconnected, we want to understand if there is any difference of nitrogen removal or nitrogen uptake in the tubers between the three spots. No difference, right? So their nitrogen use in different spots are not varied under the variable rate irrigation. For specific gravity, again, it's indicating the starch content of the tubers. Dry and field average are significantly higher than the wet spot in the nozzle control system, under the nozzle control system. Speed control system didn't have significant difference, but again, the dry spot is showing a higher number. For the hollow heart, which is a critical defect, physiological defect that the growers take care of in the field, there's not significant difference of problems between the three spots under the nozzle control VRI, whereas the higher the higher incidence of hollow heart was found in a wet spot. And then these are the potato tubers we dug from the wet spot. We only stored them for 1 month, and look at how rotten and crappy they can go, because they have been sitting in a waterlogged situation for too long. So the takeaway from this study is that although we're adopting variable rate irrigation, the wet spot is still going to be very difficult to manage. The dry spot, which tends to be drier and suffer from water deficiency, can be well managed using a variable rate irrigation. So AI, or precision ag, cannot do anything. It's not a silver bullet. It's just adding one more available tool in the toolbox for the growers, but fine-tuning is still needed to manage the most difficult scenarios in the real world. So I don't have a summary slide here, but just some quick talking points for conclusions or summary. I think precision ag has a big future based upon my research experience, but there are still a lot of challenges. Big data, the efficiency of handling the data. How should we store them? For us, it's already pretty hard. We can collect, megabytes and megabytes of data per day or per minute, actually. What is the best strategy to manage these data storage? And then I mentioned the traditional destructive sampling. Usually it takes about 2 days to get the results back, but the image processing will take up to 7 days to finish. So right now, based on the current technology, they're still slower than the traditional method. So they're not really timely. How to address that? And then safety of data. Data sharing between different farms. Sometimes the data could be confidential. So what is the best strategy to manage that? And then cost. So I think so far, it's still gonna be the biggest challenge for adoption of precision ag. So hopefully I can provide some useful knowledge and information, share some information with you guys about how I view precision agriculture, and I welcome questions from our audience. Look forward to the panel discussion as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Great, Dr. Wang. Thank you so much. We have time for maybe about one question, so we open the floor or Slido for any questions you might have for Dr. Wang.
Thank you. Are there, if a farmer didn't want to fly a drone or figure out how to do these data themselves, are there commercial services that are selling this information now to buyers who are interested?
Great question. Yes, but it depends on the companies. So they can hire private services to process the data and provide the information, the feedback. But then the problem will be different private companies will have different interfaces. So, and then these interfaces are usually not compatible with the other like irrigation scheduling or fertilization scheduling, other software. So I think the conversion of interfaces, the software between different private companies are gonna be the other obstacle to overcome. Yeah, yes, they can, but the interface is one and then the cost is the other.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wang.
Okay.
Please welcome and thank Dr. Wang one more time for her talk. So we are going to have a brief 10-ish minute break while we set up for the speaker panel on stage. So we're going to reconvene in about 10-ish minutes where we'll have all the speakers on stage, and any questions we didn't get through to the day, we'll be asking them at that time as well, and any questions from the floor. And then after our speaker panel, we will be announcing the winners of the lightning talk and poster competitions. So please join us again in about 10 minutes. Thank you.